All right, let's go ahead and get started. Morning, everyone. I'm Fred Pullen. Hope you're having a good day. The second day at Microsoft Ignite. And for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about enterprise web browsing. I will cover browsing not only in the context of Windows 10, but also Windows 7, giving you some explicit guidance on web app compatibility and browser strategies. Now, if you're looking for the 300 or 400 level deep dive, this is not it. This is a session for business decision makers or IT decision makers who are deciding what the web strategy should be for their company or for their partners. So this is the high-level enterprise web browsing that gives high-level guidance. I will have a few demos, but the demos are just going to be showing you some websites, showing you some white papers, showing you some resources to help you make the right decisions. We also have deep dive sessions. We have sessions on how to upgrade to Internet Explorer 11. Hopefully it's not news to you that January 12, 2016, support for older versions of Internet Explorer goes away. So we're hoping that many customers are upgrading to IE 11 now. As a matter of fact, how many of you are already deploying IE 11 in your organizations? Good, more than half. That's great. We also have a web app troubleshooting session taught by my friend Chris Jackson. And then on Microsoft Edge, we have a couple of sessions, Microsoft Edge Overview, which I presented yesterday and will be re-presenting this morning at 10:45. And there's a Windows 10 browser management session tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. that goes into a lot more detail on how you manage Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge together. And then finally, I'll be doing a browser security overview tomorrow afternoon. So we do have a lot of great content. This is the high-level session overview, more intended for business decision makers and IT decision makers. So let's go ahead and get started. Our customer guidance for quite some time has been that customers should stay current with a modern web browser. There are lots of good reasons why it's a great idea to stay current, not least of which is for modern web support. Support for HTML5, CSS3, WebGL, and other modern standards that are required for today's websites and services. Of course, modern browsers are also much more secure than before. They're much faster than older browsers. They now have in Internet Explorer 11 much better backward compatibility. Starting last year, we shipped something called Enterprise Mode, which provides much better backward compatibility for sites designed for older versions of Internet Explorer. And I'll be talking to that in a little bit more detail later. And the final reason that we are able to add today to this list is easier operating system upgrades. Because Internet Explorer 11 is supported on Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and on Windows 10. Rumors of Internet Explorer 11's demise are greatly exaggerated. We will continue to support IE 11 for the life of Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. So let's look at the roadmap here. A couple of things I want to call out. One is that obviously we have 4 different versions that we support today on Windows 7. We have IE 8, IE 9, IE 10, and IE 11. And I wanted to give you some business context around the decision to help customers move up to IE 11 on Windows 7. But the other thing I wanted to point out is IE 11 is consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 to help ease your migration up to those operating systems. Put differently, a lot of you standardized on Internet Explorer 8 because it was the only browser version that was available both on Windows XP and on Windows 7. So it helped ease your migration from Windows XP up to Windows 7. That's part of the reason that IE 8 was so popular. IE 11 is consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. The work that you do today to upgrade to IE 11 will help ease your migration up to Windows 10 because you've already done your web app compat troubleshooting. You've already done that work. Now, of course, on Windows 10, we do have 2 browsers. We do have Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge. You can run the 2 side by side, or you can choose to standardize on one or the other if you like. It's your choice. But we would suggest for the easiest migration, you may want to choose just to standardize on IE11, because using IE11 across all your desktops, across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 can help ease that migration. Now, on Windows 7, we got a lot of feedback from you and from other customers and from partners on how difficult fragmentation was on Windows 7. Specifically around why do we support IE8, IE9, IE10, and IE11 on those platforms. There were lots of customers and partners who lived in fear that that would soon become 5 versions or 6 versions or 7 versions or 8 versions that we would support on the same Windows 7. And I wanted to give you this feedback back because I don't think this is always well understood. One of the first things that IT decision makers told us was that they needed a browser that's fast, secure, manageable, supports modern standards, and backward compatibility with legacy apps. So it's obvious that you want a browser that does it all. You want a browser that has modern standards, but also has great legacy compatibility. It should be fast, it should be secure, it should be manageable. Makes sense. Business app owners were telling us that if you have a very large, complex web app portfolio, chances are not every app in the portfolio is supported on every version of Internet Explorer. Put differently, lots of IT pros and lots of business app owners were telling me choosing which version of Internet Explorer to standardize on for my desktop was really becoming a risk management decision. In other words, if I, on Windows 7, have to choose between running IE8, IE9, IE10, or IE11, what applications can I afford to be out of support on? And so it was a very difficult decision for some customers because they said, some of my apps are standardized for IE11, some are for 10, some are for 8. How do I choose? Because I can only run one on the desktop unless I go to some virtualization solution where I have to virtualize the entire Windows desktop. So it's a costly, virtualization is possible, but it's a costly solution. Security experts, meanwhile, were telling us older versions of Internet Explorer are much less secure than more recent versions. I'm doing a session tomorrow afternoon that goes into a lot of detail on some of the security features that have evolved over time from IE8 to 9 to 10 to 11. We've made a lot of strides to improve security in the browser. But customers who were running older versions of Internet Explorer were a little worried, and rightly so, because there are some exploit kits out there that really target Internet Explorer 8 or earlier versions. And developers, of course, were telling us, how many versions of Internet Explorer do you realistically expect us to support? It wasn't just enterprise developers, it was large line of business application vendors who were saying, look, you guys have 4 versions on Windows 7. How soon before that becomes 5 or 6 or 7? Which one should we standardize on? So based on all of this feedback, based on the feedback that customers were telling us older versions of Internet Explorer weren't secure, they weren't reliable, they couldn't be used to render today's websites and services. Actually, this is a good question. Show of hands, how many of you felt like you were forced to deploy 2 browsers to address backward compatibility with IE8 and modern compatibility with some other browser? Yeah. Internet Explorer 11 can help move away from that because moving up to Internet Explorer 11 gives you modern standards and backward compatibility. And on Windows 10, we have an even better answer by providing Microsoft Edge. Oh, and the last thing here I should mention, IT architects. IT architects were telling us that the next generation of software services and devices, in other words, Windows 10 deployments, Windows 8.1 deployments, getting a Surface Pro 3 in your environment were sometimes blocked by web app compat issues. So in Windows 10, we do have 2 browsers. We do have Internet Explorer 11 that's consistent across all those platforms. We also have Microsoft Edge, and I'll be going into a lot of detail on what the implications of this are for your environment. We'll also save time at the end for questions. This is being recorded and streamed, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But we will answer all your questions, I promise. As I said before, Internet Explorer 11 is consistent, so the work that you're doing now will absolutely accrue benefit in helping you migrate up to Windows 10. And there are many customers who have told us that they're already planning on just standardizing on Internet Explorer 11 across all their desktops. You don't have to use Microsoft Edge. You can choose to use it if you want to. And I think there are some benefits, especially for touch devices, especially for smaller devices that may need a more touch-friendly browser than Internet Explorer 11. So Microsoft has two browsers that we will continue to support. Internet Explorer 11 will continue to get security updates and compatibility fixes. And Microsoft Edge will, moving forward, be what we bring more modern standards into. So standards that come out next year, or the year after that, or the year after that, we will continue to keep Microsoft Edge current and up to date. Let's talk about Internet Explorer 11 in some detail now. All right, Internet Explorer 11 is fast and fluid, especially when compared with older versions of Internet Explorer. Many of you running IE8 complained about performance issues, and rightly so. The JavaScript performance, the web rendering, a lot of that wasn't hardware accelerated. So Internet Explorer 11, we now hardware accelerate text rendering, graphics rendering, JavaScript, all 100% hardware accelerated. It has great backward compatibility. Arguably, this is the best feature of Internet Explorer, is that it can render sites designed for older versions of Internet Explorer better than any other browser out there. No other browser even claims to be able to render sites designed for IE8 or IE7 or IE5. And it's more secure than ever before. As I mentioned before, we're continuing to improve the security of Internet Explorer 11. We offered some features last summer, for example, that significantly increase our ability to handle use after free attacks, a specific kind of attack. And I'll be talking about that more tomorrow afternoon. So Internet Explorer 11 is absolutely the fastest web path up to Windows 10. Now, to explain the work that we've done to help customers upgrade, I should explain a little bit about our history. The first version of Internet Explorer shipped 20 years ago this August. So more than 20 years ago, customers were asking for functionality that really didn't exist yet as a web standard. It had not yet been adopted as a W3C or ECMA international standard. So there was a lot of functionality that we brought to early versions of our browser. And at the end of the day, for a lot of that functionality, the web went in a different direction. So a lot of that functionality ended up becoming proprietary. ActiveX controls are a good example. Customers wanted the ability to extend the browser functionality to include a lot of things that you couldn't do easily within a browser. So we introduced ActiveX controls. You know, great for functionality, bad for security. But the fact is there are still a lot of sites out there that you use on a regular basis that use ActiveX controls, that use Java, that use other binary extensions to the browser. And in IE5, IE6, IE7, and even to a certain degree IE8, we had some proprietary functions in those older versions of the browser that gave great functionality. Customers loved the ability to create line of business applications that used all this great functionality, but at the end of the day, it didn't become a standard, so it was essentially proprietary. Now, we learned our lesson, and in IE9, we rewrote the browser from the ground up to be based on modern standards. In IE9 to IE10 to IE11, we expanded our support for modern standards, and I'll go into some detail on which standards we chose to support and chose to expand and to include as time went by. This caused another problem, which I'll talk about a little later, but the fact is, for IE11, we treat older versions of Internet Explorer like IE5, IE6, IE7, IE8 as the legacy web, more proprietary functionality, and newer versions like IE9, IE10, and IE11 as the modern web. And moving from IE9 or IE10 up to IE11 should be significantly easier than migrating from older versions of Internet Explorer. Like, you remember the migration that you did from IE6 or IE7 up to IE8. Pretty painful. We know that. Because you were moving from one proprietary set of functionality to a different proprietary set of functionality, often it required changes to your websites, changes to your web applications, and it was painful. So a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years has been, how can we make the upgrade easier? How can we make it easier for customers to upgrade? And we know that the cost isn't in terms of deployment. The cost isn't in terms of Internet Explorer 11 management. Management of Internet Explorer is pretty well understood at this point. The biggest cost in migrating is the cost of testing and remediating or fixing your web applications. And so if we could provide a better way to test and remediate those applications, we know we could reduce your cost and reduce the effort of upgrading. And so that's what we focused on. We focused first, last year in April, we issued something called Enterprise Mode, which provided a higher fidelity emulation for IE8. So the migration from IE8 up to IE11 suddenly became a lot easier because we provided a much better emulation for that browser. We expanded that last November to include the ability for you to put any website in any document mode without changing a single line of code on the website. This really puts IT pros back in the position of power, because now we have the ability through management techniques, through Management Console, through an XML file, to put any web path, not just a domain, but any web path. Microsoft.com/ABC gets one mode, Microsoft.com/ABC/XYZ gets a different mode. Any web path can be put in any document mode without changing code on the site. And in fact, here's the kicker. Enterprise Mode Site List, by using these doc modes, actually can override what the site itself is asking for. Some of you gave us feedback that you worked with extranet sites, or you worked with partners, or even internally. You had line of business applications that were 10 or 15 years old that were explicitly requesting the wrong document mode. So we gave you the ability to override that by setting the document mode to whatever you want, whatever works with the site, and deploy that easily throughout your organization in terms of a group policy or registry key. So a lot of our efforts over the last year have been focused on how do we make testing and remediation easier. The last piece of the puzzle that we added for Enterprise Mode is something called IE7 Enterprise Mode. Remember, last April we introduced IE8 Enterprise Mode to provide higher fidelity emulation for IE8. Some of you were asking for better emulation in the context of IE7 or even IE5, what we call compatibility view. And we'll be going into a lot more detail on how this works in Thursday's session, which is the Enterprise Mode Deep Dive. But suffice to say, we feel like that's the last piece of the puzzle for Enterprise Mode to provide really great backward compatibility for these older versions of Internet Explorer and help you get up to IE11 easier than before. Now, I don't want to wear your arms out, but show of hands, anybody who uses Enterprise Mode? Yeah, a lot of you. Because it helps ease that migration. It helps make it a lot easier to move to IE11 than before, because you don't have to make as many changes to the websites. Enterprise Mode is also consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. So the work that you do today for Enterprise Mode on Windows 7 absolutely will accrue benefit on Windows 8.1 or Windows 10 as you move up to Windows 10 and that operating system. Now, it's not just Microsoft saying this. It's you telling us and telling analysts that you're finding the upgrade is easier before. We hired Forrester Consulting to go do a study, because I had a hypothesis that it was making the upgrade easier, and I wanted somebody to actually prove out or disprove that hypothesis. If an analyst is able to come back to me and say, yes, you're right, then that's great. I can use it for marketing materials. If he says, no, you're wrong, then I use it as a hammer against my engineers here in the front row. So it's absolutely useful for me to either prove or disprove the hypothesis that Enterprise Mode actually does work. And the good news is, for everybody, I think, is that enterprise mode does work. What Forrester found was that they interviewed 150 IT pros in the US, UK, Germany, and Japan. And these were IT pros who were already deploying IE11 in environments of 1,000 desktops or more. What they found was about half, 47%, said that the upgrade to IE11 was easier than before, or easier than past upgrades. And 90% of those said it was because they were using enterprise mode. By comparison, the 5 or 6% who said that the upgrade was more difficult than they anticipated were trying to upgrade their line of business applications to modern standards. They weren't trying to use backward compatibility at all. They were trying to make changes to their websites to make it compatible with IE11 and ran into some problems there. Now, obviously, our long-term guidance, which I'll cover later, but our long-term guidance is upgrading to modern standards is still the right thing to do. But if you can leverage backward compatibility temporarily, it may make sense to help you get over the hump and get to the next generation of software and services and devices. We also, just this week, published 2 new white papers on Microsoft IT Showcase. So if you go to Microsoft IT Showcase, as a matter of fact, let's do that now. I'm just going to pop up a web browser here. So this is the Microsoft IT Showcase. And it basically shows you how Microsoft does IT. Now, I realize I was an IT pro for 15 years before joining Microsoft 11 years ago. I realize that how Microsoft does IT doesn't always reflect what you do within your business. But it may help you understand how we do things, may help you understand some best practices or some suggestions for your own organization. And I wanted to show you where to find these white papers because it's a little bit obscured. If you go to Content, Content Library, should be the first 2 links, at least today, because they were just released. Microsoft IT improves line of business application testing, ensuring readiness for Windows. And Microsoft IT prepares line of business application for Windows. These are basically the same study, but one of them is a business case study, and one of them is the technical case study. And what we found, switching back to the slides, what we found is that prioritizing and cataloging your applications can help you have a better testing methodology because you don't have to test necessarily every application. Now, I realize in some environments, culturally, you may work in a company where quality is so high a bar. I'm a Six Sigma green belt. I understand quality. You may work in an environment where quality has so high a bar that you have to test every single application because failure is not an option. On the other hand, you may work in an environment where if you have 30,000 web applications, testing every web application may push your deployment to next century. So it may behoove you to figure out what applications are dependent on the same kind of technology. In other words, how many of your applications are actually still running Java 1.6.1? And can we cluster that group of applications and just test a couple of them? The canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. If you test a couple of applications that are dependent on the same technology and they seem to work, then you may not need to test everything. If you test a couple of applications in the same cluster and they fail, then it's probably worth testing everything in that dependent cluster. And so what we found was, and it's buried in the agility section, we only tested approximately 15% of our application portfolio at Microsoft. Now, this is important because at Microsoft, we're always testing the latest version of our operating system and browser, even before it's released. So we're on the bleeding edge. As we say internally, we eat our own dog food. We have to be able to use the latest software. So 100,000 plus employees and vendors are trying the latest software. And Microsoft IT has the difficult position of trying to make sure that everything works. But the good news is they don't have to test everything. They test a subset. They make sure the subset works. If there are problems, they were able to remediate those using the enterprise mode site list. So we do have some entries in the enterprise mode site list within Microsoft that helped us upgrade to Windows 10 much easier than ever before. And this is the white paper that goes through how we accomplished that. There's also a significant cost savings, obviously. Now, other benefits from upgrading to Internet Explorer 11. I mentioned these briefly before, but modern web standards, support for HTML5, support for CSS, v3, WebGL, SVG. There's a lot of really good modern web standards. Now, I'll mention later how this came around to bite us, but the fact is, Internet Explorer 11 is our most standards-based browser yet, until Microsoft Edge. And there's support for a lot of great standards that you use today in your line of business applications. Much better performance, hardware acceleration, network prioritization, network improvements. We will render first-party content, for example, before we render third-party content. So there's a lot of subtle improvements into Internet Explorer 11. We will cache and pre-render content. For example, if you go to Bing and do a search, it's likely that you'll go to the next page of search results. So we will create an invisible tab and pre-render that content so that when you click on the next, you're essentially having one tab disappear and the other tab appear, and it seems pretty fast. It seems pretty instantaneous. We've also significantly improved security, not only by making improvements to our Smart Screen filter. Smart Screen filter does a couple of things. Smart Screen filter filters out URLs. So if you type in a URL, it checks against the Smart Screen filter. And so as not to slow things down, it actually works kind of asynchronously. In other words, it will start to pull down content from the site, but it's also checking with Microsoft to make sure the site isn't a known bad site, isn't known to contain malware. And if it is, it puts the kibosh on that. And in fact, you can configure this in your organization so that users can't override the ability to get to that site. If it's known to contain malware, certainly your administrators should be able to override that and should be able to get to it if you choose to allow them. But your average end user perhaps should not be able to override a security warning saying they're about to install malware on their system. The other way that Smart Screen works is by doing app filtering, or what we call application reputation. So when you download a piece of software, we have a database internally that contains essentially the signature of known malware. On any given day, we scan millions and millions of pieces of malware, and we basically come up with a determination. It's either a known good file, in which case the user sees nothing and the file is downloaded appropriately. It's a known bad file, in which case the user is warned that it's a bad file, and you can configure it so they can't override that. Or it's unknown. But the thing about unknown files is on any given day, roughly between 25 and 70% of unknown files are actually malware. It's so easy for malware authors to now simply recompile their application with a slight tweak, and now the signature is different. So the way that antivirus vendors have conducted business has really changed over time to more of a defense in depth strategy, and I'll be going into more detail on this tomorrow afternoon. But Smart Screen does a really good job of preventing not only malicious URLs, but also socially engineered malware. Socially engineered malware means basically malware that you've somehow been convinced to download, whether through a website that said, install this ActiveX control to see this video. Oh, cool, I want to see dancing monkeys. And someone installs the malware. Or you get a link in email that may be a targeted attack through email, and click on the link and you install something that you shouldn't. So that's what Smart Screen helps prevent, and we've made a lot of improvements. This is a service that Microsoft provides. So we've made continuous improvements in this service and in the algorithms that we use to spot malware. We also have a lot of other security improvements. I won't go into detail. Like I said, I've got a whole session on this tomorrow. And then better reliability. Improved compatibility. We now use process isolation. If something fails, it may not take down your entire browser or take down your entire system. We also have auto recovery. So if for some reason a tab crashes, it can restart the tab. Performance, though, is a pretty important one. I've had some customers tell me that the performance improvements that they gained by moving from IE8 to IE11 paid for the upgrade. Because IE8 in their environment, with their particular line of business applications, was pretty slow. So they were able to do the math on this and say, look, IE11 running this function happens in X seconds. IE8 running this function happens in Y seconds. Do the math across my 100,000 or 200,000 or 400,000 users, and I've just saved the company this much money. So often the performance improvements alone for Internet Explorer 11 can help justify the upgrade. Actually, it's ironic. We had one customer tell us, and this is part of a case study, City of Miami, they justified the upgrade not based on performance improvements, but based on the power savings that performance improvement gave them. Because they were able to save power because the machines didn't need to be used as much. So they were able to justify it on the power savings from better efficiency. As I said before, IE9 was our first truly standards-based browser. We rewrote the browser from the ground up to be based on modern standards, and we had pretty good support at this point for the beginning of HTML5, CSS, ECMAScript 5. IE10, we added significant support for these W3C or ECMA International standards. Lots more HTML5, lots more CSS3. And in IE10, we continued to add to this. Now, I often get the question, if I go to HTML5test.com or another HTML5 testing website, your score is below other people's score, so you don't have as good a browser. We shouldn't use your browser because your score is 100 less, and 100 is a big number. So I don't know what those numbers really mean, but those numbers, one is larger than the other, therefore you must have a worse browser. There are a couple things I would suggest about this, though. One is, what standards do you actually need? What standards do you actually need to use in your environment, particularly for your line of business web applications? Because I'll give you an example. Until very recently, there was another browser that included support for Ogtheora, an older web codec, or video codec. And what they found was they had a higher score for video support because they supported more video codecs. They didn't support H.264, which is one of the more broadly used codecs on the web. But for licensing reasons, they didn't support H.264 until just last year. But they did support Ogtheora and some more obscure video codecs, so they had a higher score. Internet Explorer supported H.264. We supported the most popular video codecs on the web, but we had a lower score because we didn't support these older video codecs. So that's why I suggest if you actually dig into it and find out which standards you actually need for your applications, you may be pleasantly surprised. The other thing I'll mention about HTML5 test or some of these other sites is they don't test the quality of implementation. If a browser claims to support a standard, then they get the points. But it doesn't actually test how well it supports that standard. Internet Explorer 11, we created thousands of test cases to make sure that we support the standards appropriately. So we do a pretty good job of supporting the standards on the screen. Now, this caused another problem for the public-facing web, which I'll talk about in a minute. But for line of business applications, for consistency and reliability across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10, IE11 actually has pretty good support for the standards that you use in line of business applications. So in summary, IE11 is fast. It really differentiates by having the best backward compatibility in the business. It's more secure than ever. And I would argue that IE11 is a great web browser for legacy line of business applications, or even line of business applications that you need now or are developing now that you want consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. Let's talk next about Microsoft Edge. And I go into a lot more detail in our Microsoft Edge session that's coming up in 10:45. But our old strategy for IE9, IE10, and IE11 was to focus on web standards. As I said before, we rewrote the browser from the ground up in IE9 to be based on modern standards, and I just showed you a list of these standards that were included in IE9, IE10, and IE11. The problem that caused us was kind of ironic, because there are other ecosystems out there, other devices, other browsers, and they have their own ways of doing things that we viewed as kind of proprietary. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of websites out there that are designed for the iPad. And so the way the iPad handles touch events and the way the iPad handles a drop-down menu, we viewed as proprietary to the iPad. We had gone down that road for earlier versions of Internet Explorer for IE5, IE6, IE7, IE8. We didn't want to go down that road again. We didn't want, as a matter of principle, we didn't want to include those proprietary functions in our browser. We wanted to be standards-based. At the end of the day, we had arguably one of the best standards-based browsers out there, perhaps the best standards-based browser, but if it doesn't work with the site that's designed for an iPad, how good is it? So these circles are meant to represent the other ecosystems out there. Other browsers, other devices, Android, iOS, you name it. There are sites and web applications out there that were designed to support just those ecosystems. And at the end of the day, we didn't have a browser that did as good a job in supporting mostly public-facing websites. Public-facing websites that worked fine maybe for an iPad or for an Android device, but didn't work as well in IE10 or IE11. Our new focus, our new strategy in Microsoft Edge is to focus on interoperability. So the new focus is, how can we have a browser that just works? If it works in another browser, if it works on another device, it should just work in Microsoft Edge, because that's where our focus is. To date, we've made over 4,000 interoperability fixes. We've added support for things like WebKit extensions that before now we would have viewed as proprietary. We would have viewed that as something that somebody else is doing that maybe not a standard, so we didn't want to include it. Now in Microsoft Edge, we're trying to err on the side of interoperability. We now include those things. Sites designed for the iPad with drop-down menus should work. If you're curious about the status of a particular standard, you can go to status.modern.ie and find out more information about whether a standard is already included in our browser, Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge, because there's lots of standards that Internet Explorer 11 supports. You'll also find out whether a standard is under consideration or whether it's an active development, whether it's actively being brought into the browser. Now, in a world where any modern browser should be able to render your website just as well as any other browser, how do we differentiate? Microsoft Edge has features that sit over and above just being a good web browser. Microsoft Edge has features like Cortana integration that make it easier for you to find information you care about. It's the only browser that has WebNote, the ability to mark up a web page and easily share that with friends and colleagues. It has a built-in reading view that makes it easier to find the content that you care about. And that's particularly useful on smaller devices, because Microsoft Edge is the default Windows 10 browser across smartphone, tablet, laptop, desktop. Now, as I said before, you can choose to make Internet Explorer 11 your default browser. You can choose not to use Edge in Microsoft Edge in your environment. But if you choose to use Microsoft Edge, it does bring a lot to the table in terms of interoperability with the modern web, great for touch and mouse and keyboard, and what I call meta features that sit over and above just being a great web browser. So I've got a quick video to show you here. This is not a 20-year-old browser. I think that deserves a little bit. So we're excited about this. Microsoft Edge on Windows 10 holds the promise of interoperability, a browser that just works across the public-facing web and services, and that has these features that sit over and above just being a great web browser. But in an enterprise context, we realize Internet Explorer is still pretty important. And like I said before, we will continue to support Internet Explorer 11 for Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. In the context of Windows 10 specifically, what we would suggest is Internet Explorer 11 is available for primarily compatibility. You can choose to use it as your single browser. You don't have to use another browser with it. You don't have to use Microsoft Edge. But if you choose to do so, it's available there for you. Now, this is an important distinction because Internet Explorer 11 is software as a product. In other words, it's consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. It's not going to change significantly over time, which is important for a lot of industries. It's important for a lot of companies that have maybe a regulated industry. I have pharmaceutical companies, financial services, military coming to me and saying, I want a consistent web browser that works across my Windows platforms that's not going to change over time, because once I test my lab, once I test my desktop, my critical line of business applications, I don't want that software to change over time significantly, because that means I have to test again. So Internet Explorer 11 is software as a product that's not going to change significantly over time outside of security updates and compatibility fixes. Microsoft Edge, on the other hand, is more like software as a service. Like other browsers, Microsoft Edge will have minor iterative updates over time and will continue to get better. So we will no longer have the older document modes. We will no longer have, in Microsoft Edge, we won't be forking the code every time we come out with an update. We won't have multiple document modes within Microsoft Edge. There's one mode, and it will continue to evolve over time. So there's a choice. Public-facing websites that focus on interoperability, Microsoft Edge should work great and continue to work and continue to get better. But if you're in an environment where you have a critical line of business application that you rely on to run your business, and you feel like you can't incur any risk associated with that, you don't have to use software as a service. You can move to software as a product. You can stay on Internet Explorer 11 for the life of Windows 7, Windows 8.1, or Windows 10. So this is the essence of these browsers. IE 11 is great for large organizations that have these dependencies on web applications. It has great backward compatibility to help you get up to IE 11 in the first place. And Microsoft Edge has great browsing across Windows devices, and it has meta features that sit over and above just being a great web browser. And again, IE 11 is going to be absolutely your fastest path up to Windows 10. So the work you're doing now will absolutely accrue benefits. So some guidance and some resources for you, and then we'll take questions. Our web app guidance is upgrading to modern standards is the right thing to do long term, but in the short term, leveraging backward compatibility can help you upgrade faster. It can help unblock your upgrades for Windows 10, Office 365, new Windows devices, new Windows tablets. If you can get to Internet Explorer 11 and leverage backward compatibility, it helps open up that next generation of technology. Some compatibility resources, and I wanted to show these to you just briefly. So we just relaunched the Tech Center on TechNet yesterday. And we've got pages here, and I'll slide this over a little bit. We've got pages on this website now that explain upgrade guidance, the benefits, resources available to help you upgrade. We also have more information about enterprise mode and compatibility. And we have a story about Windows 10. So we have more information about Windows 10 browsing. So this is a completely new page as well that reflects the things that I'm sharing with you this morning. We also have modern.ie. Modern.ie is a website primarily for developers to help upgrade to modern standards. Now, a lot of the resources on modern.ie are operating system agnostic. In other words, we realize that a lot of web developers, particularly public web developers, may be using other tools. They may even be using other operating systems. So we've created a lot of resources on this page that are agnostic to those. And I'll go ahead and pull this one up as well, just to show you briefly. So modern.ie, you can test from any device with Remote App, and there are Remote App clients for a variety of different operating systems here. You can run virtual machines. You can get browser snapshots, how your site looks across 9 common browsers and devices. There's a compatibility report. If you submit a website, a public-facing website, it will send back a compatibility report that shows you how well your site works across browsers. So how well it adheres to modern standards, as well as how well it works for older versions of Internet Explorer. It'll even give you some information about accessibility. Does your site render well for people who have accessibility needs? Does each picture, for example, have text behind it for folks who may not be able to see the pictures as well? And then there's also a site scanner. So this site scanner is something you can run or you can download. It's also a GitHub project. So you can download a local copy of the site scanner and run it within your intranet environment. Now this isn't a web crawler. It just does a high-level scan of what's available on the site, but it is very useful because it'll tell you, for example, if you're using an older version of jQuery and you simply need to update the jQuery to another modern standard, to another updated version of jQuery. So the scanner itself, if you're interested in upgrading your web applications to modern standards, you have a lot of homegrown or self-authored line of business applications, you can more easily upgrade those to modern standards by using the tools that are on this modern.ie website. There are also lots of Microsoft resources that can help. We have Microsoft Services Premier Support. Microsoft Consulting Services often goes on-site and can help customers upgrade. And this is upgrading really how you want to upgrade. There are some customers who have told us they want to leverage backward compatibility for everything. And that's fine. It's up to you. So we can help you accomplish that. Or there are some customers who have said we want to upgrade these critical web applications but use backward compatibility for everything else. We can help you do that too. There's an Internet Explorer migration workshop. This started out as a 3-day workshop, thanks in part to some of the folks in the front row here, the engineers with me. We've now reduced this workshop in some cases down to a 1-day workshop because we're able to leverage backward compatibility and not necessarily have to upgrade all your line of business applications to modern standards. So it's up to you. We can create a workshop that depends on your needs. And obviously Microsoft partners. There are lots of Microsoft partners who are spinning up their own practice to help customers upgrade. So our customer guidance is, if you're using an older version of Internet Explorer, please upgrade to IE 11 to remain supported after January 12, 2016, and to help ease your migration up to Windows 10. If you're managing a complex web app portfolio, Internet Explorer 11 has the security, manageability, performance, backward compatibility, and modern standard support. There are many customers who have told us that by moving to IE 11, they were able to go to a single browser solution. And that they're looking forward to moving to Windows 10 and the promise that Microsoft Edge holds about always being up to date. But for now, Internet Explorer 11 is a good browser. For now, Internet Explorer 11 does meet their needs on Windows 7, and they do plan on migrating up to Windows 10 at some point. And if you're developing line of business applications today, keep in mind that Internet Explorer 11 has the largest Windows desktop addressable market across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and on Windows 10. So please treat Internet Explorer 11 as the lowest common denominator. If you write line of business applications that work with IE 11's up-to-date mode, or the IE 11 document mode, then moving up to Edge down the road, moving up to Microsoft Edge should be so much easier because you're already writing an application that's compliant with modern web standards. All right, there are a few more resources that I wanted to call out to your attention. We obviously have TechNet and MSDN, Modern.ie, and the Microsoft Showcase. I wanted to get the URLs for you of some of the websites that I showed you briefly throughout this presentation. And then finally, at Microsoft Ignite, we have 5 other browser-related sessions, and I wanted to put them in chronological order for you with the location. There's a couple of things I wanted to call out here too, though. One is we have a drop-in AppCompat troubleshooting workshop on Thursday. So if you didn't raise your hand for my first question, which was how many of you are running IE 11, if you're still running IE 8, IE 9, or IE 10, perhaps you have a web app compatibility issue, you have a problem with a particular application, feel free to drop by anytime between 11 and 5 on Thursday. And engineers are standing by. We can help you troubleshoot that web application in real time. We tried something similar in Microsoft in Redmond in January, and we were very successful in helping customers upgrade their applications or upgrade to IE 11 just by using enterprise mode and the backward compatibility. The other thing I wanted to point out is we do have sessions that are much more technical than this. I realize that some of you come to Ignite for the 300 level, 400 level content. We have that available. In particular, at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we'll be talking about Windows 10 browser management. And at 9 a.m. on Thursday, we'll cover enterprise mode deep dive. So those are the more technical sessions. As I started out saying, today's session was really intended for IT decision makers and business decision makers, high-level resources, and some studies that may be able to help you make the right decision as you move forward. Let's go ahead and take some questions. Anyone? Yeah, if you don't mind, please use the microphones because this is being streamed and recorded, so we want to make sure other people can hear. Yeah. Can you switch the tabs? Switch the tabs? I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, go to the last screen. Go to the last screen. Okay. This one? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Curious about the life cycle. So you said be able to have 11 through 7, 8, and 10, and then what's the life cycle for 11?
Internet Explorer is still considered a component of Windows. So Internet Explorer, the latest version of Internet Explorer follows the life cycle of its parent product. So on Windows 7, for example, Internet Explorer 11 will be supported through January 2020, which is the Windows 7 lifecycle. IE 11 on Windows 8.1 follows the lifecycle of Windows 8.1, and IE 11 on Windows 10 would follow the lifecycle of Windows 10.
Good, thank you.
Of course. Yes?
Hi, Fred. I have a question about the resources. We have been started the IE 11 deployment, and yeah, things are going okay, and the enterprise model is working, so it's looking good. But of course, it is, as we see it, as an intermediate solution only, because still those old web applications exist, and we have to eventually do something about them. So what I'm looking for is some kind of a checklist or a resource that I would be able to give in my organization to the developers, saying that this is exactly what you have to do with your applications. So is there a resource like that? And even with the vendors that are supposed to be professionals in making web applications, they haven't even heard that, yeah, we should be switching over to IE 11. So that type of a resource, it would be very valuable.
No, that's great feedback. We do have some resources, obviously, to help customers understand and partners understand backward compatibility. But I think what you're asking for is how do we help them moving forward?
Exactly.
Right.
How to get ahead. What is the practical things to do?
Got it, got it. This is why we created the modern.ie website, but I think to your point, I don't know if we have a partner-ready or customer-ready presentation that summarizes this in just a few slides.
Yeah.
So I will take that as an action item for us to go do in the next few weeks.
Awesome.
All right, thank you. I'm presenting, by the way, at Worldwide Partner Conference, and I will be talking to ISVs and to systems integrators about this opportunity. So we need to have really good messaging and really good content before July. I will treat this as a first version for you. Okay, thank you. Yes?
Yes, I was wondering if you could explain the difference between compatibility view, which was available in the older versions, and enterprise mode. I get confused reading those. They sound very similar to me.
Not a problem. Yeah, we get a lot of customers who are confused on this because the nomenclature is very similar. We will be going into a lot more detail on Thursday's session in Enterprise Mode Deep Dive, but I'll give you the short version now. Internet Explorer 8, we realized that we had to provide backward compatibility for websites that were designed for IE5 or IE6 and IE7. So in Internet Explorer 8, we introduced something called Compatibility View. It's basically a switch. Compatibility View says, let's render the site in IE7 document mode if there's an explicit doc type tag in the website or on the web page. If there's no doc type tag, it falls back to IE5, what we call Quirks mode. So Compatibility View has been the default since IE8 for intranet sites. Remember the setting, display all intranet sites in Compatibility View? That's because customers told us they had so many internal line of business applications that were written for IE5 or IE6 or IE7 that that has been the default ever since. Well, now Enterprise Mode provides higher fidelity emulation for IE8s, including now the ability to run this high fidelity emulation in Compatibility View. So you can get, it's a complementary technologies. You can use Enterprise Mode in Compatibility View to get this better emulation for IE8 and have IE8 use this Compatibility View to render the site in IE7 doc mode if there's a doc type, or in IE5 doc mode if there's not a doc type. Now I realize it's confusing for me just to hold my hands in the air and kind of describe it that way. We will be spending probably about 20 minutes on this in Thursday's session. Yes?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to try to throw two at you real quick. First one's probably a little bit easier. The modern.ie website, which is great for scanning stuff outside, and I know there's the offline code. The offline code seems to be a little quirky, though. We've had some issues. Do you have some additional resources that are available or to scan internal URLs? I know it didn't seem to work very well for us in our initial testing of it. So that's the first question. The second one's probably the bigger question. Moving forward with Edge, I know we're eliminating Java and those type things, the ActiveX components completely. Is Microsoft reaching out to the developer communities and communicating this to all the app developers? Because it seems like people still are continuously writing and using these old components.
Yeah, so first things first, your first question was about, are there other troubleshooting tools? We do have some web application troubleshooting tools that we created around IE9 or IE10 that may be able to help as well. So there is, Jatinder Mann, one of our engineers, may be able to help with this one.
Yes, I think the modern.ie engine is also available on GitHub if you want to download and use it internally, the crawler engine.
Yeah, but we also have some other tools, and we'll be beefing those up over time. The second question you had was about, remind me? About communicating out to the developer community. Communicating to the developer community. Got it. Yeah, so the outreach that we've done to the public-facing web community has been pretty clear. I think you'll see that the message that we gave at Build last week was, if you're creating a public website, then you should be using modern standards. You shouldn't be using browser sniffing at all. You shouldn't care what browser it is. You should be doing feature detection. And Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge should work for most public websites today. So we've been giving really good guidance to public-facing website developers. For line-of-business app developers, it's a little more complex because there are line-of-business developers who say, look, I've used Java for years. That's my skill set. I'm a Java developer. They say that I've used ActiveX controls for years to get around limitations of the browser. And so there are customers who still are using those technologies. Now, our guidance to them is ultimately moving to modern standards is the best thing to do. But for line of business applications particularly, we will continue to support IE11. And that's it. We can't make it go away. There are millions, if not billions, of line of business applications out there that use this older technology. So we can give the best guidance we have, which is you should be upgrading to modern standards. You should be writing code to modern standards. You can do away with some of these security problems if you can wean yourself from older technology. But the fact is there are a lot of developers out there who consider themselves an ActiveX developer or a Java developer or older technologies. Yes?
Yeah, my question's more on like end user impact and getting ready for the change readiness when we have Edge and IE11 both out there. So I would say even in like 5 years, we'll still be pretty dependent on legacy backwards compatibility with our line of business apps. But it seems like we'd also really want to leverage the new functionalities and interoperability of Edge. Are you guys thinking about any issues of having IE11 and Edge deployed at the same time? Like if a user sits down in the morning and they need to launch an older web application and they click on Edge instead, does that automatically shoot them over to IE11, or just kind of thinking, end users are end users, so just any issues there?
No, that's a great point to bring up. We'll be going into more detail on this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. In our Windows 10 browser management session. But you're absolutely right. End users shouldn't have to know anything. They shouldn't have to do anything. It should just work. And that's our principle. That's our goal. If you're running in Microsoft Edge and you encounter a site that needs to fall back to IE11, you can configure so that every site on your intranet falls back to IE11. You can also configure it so that any site using the enterprise mode site list could fall back to IE11. Microsoft also has our own compatibility view list, which we've had for years, and we've expanded this now to include the ability to enable customers to fall back from Microsoft Edge over to Internet Explorer 11 as needed for public-facing websites. For example, in some areas, banks still use ActiveX controls for PKI. So in those areas, we want to make sure that those public-facing websites also fall back gracefully. So the short answer is absolutely yes. We want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for end users. You can only choose one default browser. If that browser happens to be Microsoft Edge, it can fall back to IE11 gracefully. Yes?
Yes, we've already deployed a lot of Server 2012, so I'm curious about support for Internet Explorer 11 on Server 2012.
Server 2012, if I remember correctly, if you go to support.microsoft.com/lifecycle, and actually I can do this right now, support.microsoft.com/lifecycle, what we can do is look it up. There is a Q&A specifically on Microsoft's Internet Explorer. And there's a table here that shows all of the versions that are supported. So Windows Server 2012 is Internet Explorer 10. Windows Server 2012 R2 is Internet Explorer 11.
Right. Is there a reason that they're not going to have an Internet Explorer 11 available for 2012?
I believe, I don't want to make things up, but keep in mind that the server is always based on the client architecture. So it's very similar. For example, we know that Windows Server 2008 SP2 was based on the same kernel as Windows Vista. So Windows Server 2008 SP2, like Windows Vista, only goes up to Internet Explorer 9. I believe that Windows Server 2012 is supported on IE10 for similar reasons, and Windows Server 2012 R2 is supported on IE11. Okay, anything else? Yes, question?
Yes, the approach that we took was, for IE11 upgrade was, by default, everybody had to test in Edge mode. And at that point, if you found that you needed a different document mode, we pushed developers to implement either HTTP header or meta tag. And I know that Microsoft's communicated that that mode or compatibility mode will be deprecated, but at what point would we tell developers that that would no longer be supported, header or meta tag?
Yeah, this was confusing to me as well. I'm an IT pro by trade. I'm not a developer. So for me, the word deprecated meant deleted. And my developer friends were quick to point out that, no, deprecated simply means it's been superseded by a newer technology. So in this sense, when we said that older document modes are considered deprecated, what we actually meant was they've been superseded by newer technology. You shouldn't use them anymore for new development. We will continue to support older document modes for the life of Internet Explorer 11.
So you're saying if we told developers to set a header to, say, emulate IE7 or IE5, and they're on Win10, IE11, and it's an internal site, that those headers should still work?
Those headers should still work.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so it's not like there's like an expiration date, because we've been taking advantage a little bit of the fact that we know this and they don't, and just saying, well, you better get your site updated because these headers and meta tags won't last for long. And we didn't know if that was more of the case for external sites versus internal sites.
Yeah, we were primarily concerned about external sites, frankly, because there were still public-facing websites that said, oh, if you're Internet Explorer, I know how to handle you. Here's IE7 code or IE8 code. And the primary reason those sites didn't work in Internet Explorer wasn't because we didn't support modern standards. If the site worked in another browser but didn't work in IE, quite often it was because they were just giving us old code. So what we were trying to get across to the public web developer community was, please treat us just like any other browser. Give us modern code. Give us modern markup. For legacy internal line of business applications, the browser will absolutely continue to support those document modes.
Yeah, we found it that developers actually liked us advising them to use that strategy as opposed to us taking the responsibility as engineers to say, well, we'll take your site and we'll put it in the GPO sites list or enterprise mode, because then at that point we own their part of their website, and they would escalate to us. And if we force that ownership on them, it would force them to have to remediate and get up to edge mode faster.
Yeah, it's a good point to make. There are a lot of IT pros who say enterprise mode is great, but it puts the onus of responsibility on IT. And they'd much rather have the developers continue to own that problem. So thank you for pointing that out. Yes, question?
I'm curious what the behavior will be with Edge if it encounters some web app that's trying to load a binary extension. Will it automatically roll over to IE11, or do you have to leverage enterprise mode list to define that?
So Internet Explorer 11 will continue to support all extensions. So Edge, when you're saying Edge, like Microsoft Edge?
If Microsoft Edge happens to encounter a website that requires an ActiveX control, what happens?
Yes, so we're going to talk about this quite a bit in the browser management session tomorrow at 9. There's a site list that you can tailor in the enterprise mode where you can choose to transition from IE11, from Microsoft Edge to IE11 for sites that require IE proprietary technology, like ActiveX.
Okay, so it sounds like it's still leveraged the enterprise site mode list
Yes.
to direct pages that way.
We didn't want to do that automatically. A lot of black hole kits, a lot of attacks use ActiveX controls in the wild, so we didn't want to automatically detect, oh, it's an ActiveX control, because we would pretty much allow these malicious attacks to happen by downgrading security from Spartan to Project.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so I only had one question, but that discussion just sparked another one. So I'll just touch base on this one really quick before I get into my original. What you said about having another list, does that mean we're going to maintain two lists? We're going to maintain a site list for enterprise mode in IE11 as well as some sort of site list for Edge?
No, one list.
Okay. All right. Cool. Question is, when we rolled out IE11, we set the policy so that users could enable enterprise mode ad hoc through the tools menu in the browser. And what we're finding is that that behavior is slightly different than setting enterprise mode in the site list via policy. So when you set it via the site list, it seems to affect the per site. And when you set it via the tools menu, it seems to affect per page. Can you confirm that that's the case? And if so, are there any other differences between the two?
Yes, I can confirm that when you set enterprise mode from the tools menu, it sets it for that page. When you set it via the site list, it does it for the site. So what we've updated our guidance here based on your feedback. What we suggest is that you use the F12 developer tools to actually do your testing. And we'll be going into a lot more detail in Thursday morning session at 9 a.m. on how you can use F12 for testing, not just in enterprise mode, IE8 enterprise mode, and the new IE7 enterprise mode, but also for all of the other document modes. So we'll walk through that, and I'll show you a demo of how you can accomplish this.
Okay, and thank you for IE7 or enterprise mode. That helped a lot of issues.
Excellent, thank you. All right, thank you everyone. We're finishing right on time, so thank you very much for your time.